When a woman starts falling from the sky and landing on you every day, you'd think it's bad luck. Turns out it might be the best thing that ever happened. Jake had always been the unlucky type. You know that person who gets stuck in traffic when everyone else is cruising? That was him. The guy who orders food right before the kitchen closes, or finds the one broken elevator in a building full of them. His friends called it the Jake effect. If something could go wrong at the worst possible moment, it would happen to Jake. Working as a computer programmer at a small tech company didn't help his luck much. While his coworkers went home at 5 o'clock sharp, Jake stayed behind, wrestling with stubborn computer code that refused to work properly. His desk was right next to the loudest printer in the office, and somehow, he always got the projects with impossible deadlines. Tonight was no different. It was almost midnight on a Tuesday, and Jake was still staring at his laptop screen, trying to fix a program that kept crashing. The office was empty and quiet, except for the annoying buzz of the old air conditioning unit. He'd been sitting in the same chair for 6 straight hours, and his back was killing him. "This is ridiculous," Jake muttered to himself, rubbing his tired eyes. He needed a change of scenery, somewhere peaceful where he could think clearly. That's when he remembered the rooftop garden. Most people didn't even know it existed. The building's owner had installed it years ago but never really promoted it. Jake had discovered it by accident a few months back when he'd gotten off the elevator on the wrong floor. It was perfect, quiet, peaceful, and open to the night sky. Jake packed up his laptop and headed upstairs. The garden was exactly what he needed. Small trees in large pots created cozy corners, and string lights gave everything a warm glow. He found a comfortable spot near some flowering bushes and set up his makeshift office on a wooden bench. The night air was cool and refreshing after being stuck inside all day. Jake could actually think up here, away from the fluorescent lights and office noise. He opened his laptop and dove back into his work, feeling more focused than he had all day. For the next hour, everything was perfect. The code was starting to make sense, and Jake was making real progress. He'd even managed to fix 2 major bugs that had been driving him crazy. Maybe his luck was finally changing. At exactly 11:47 p.m., Jake's world turned upside down, literally. Without any warning, something heavy crashed down from above, slamming into him with enough force to knock him clean off the bench. His laptop went flying through the air, landing somewhere in the bushes with a sickening crack. His coffee cup, which had been sitting peacefully beside him, exploded in a shower of cold liquid. Jake found himself flat on his back, staring up at the stars, completely confused and gasping for air. Something was pinning him down, something that was moving and making frustrated groaning sounds. "Oh no, oh no, oh no," a woman's voice cried out. "Not again." Jake blinked hard, wondering if he was dreaming. A young woman with messy, reddish-brown hair was sitting on top of him, looking just as shocked as he felt. She was wearing what looked like hospital scrubs, and her hair was sticking up in all directions like she'd been struck by lightning. "I'm so sorry," she said, scrambling to get off him. "Are you hurt?" "Please tell me you're not hurt." Jake sat up slowly, checking to make sure all his body parts were still working. His shoulder was sore, and he was pretty sure he'd have some colorful bruises tomorrow, but nothing seemed broken. "I think I'm okay," he said, his voice coming out as a croak. "But what just happened? Did you fall from somewhere?" The woman was frantically looking around, gathering scattered papers that Jake hadn't noticed before. She seemed to be in full panic mode. "It's complicated," she said, not meeting his eyes. "Really, really complicated. I can't even begin to explain without sounding completely crazy." Jake looked up at the sky, then around the rooftop. There was nowhere she could have fallen from. The nearest building was 3 blocks away and much shorter than this one. There were no helicopters, no planes, nothing. "Try me," he said, "because right now I'm thinking either I hit my head harder than I thought, or something very weird just happened." The woman stopped gathering papers and looked at him for the first time. She had bright green eyes that seemed to be calculating something complex. "You're going to think I'm insane," she said quietly. "Lady, you just fell out of thin air and landed on me. I'm way past normal at this point." She laughed, but it sounded nervous and shaky. "Fair point." She took a deep breath. "My name is Lily, and I work at a research facility across town. I was supposed to materialize in their testing room, but something went wrong with the coordinates." Jake stared at her. "Materialize? I know how it sounds. Trust me. A year ago, I would have laughed at someone telling me this story. Lily found his laptop in the bushes and brought it over. The screen was cracked but still glowing. I'm part of a government research project. We're working on instant transportation technology. Like teleportation? Exactly like teleportation. She handed him the damaged laptop. And apparently I'm very bad at it. Jake looked at his broken computer, then back at Lily. Part of his brain was screaming that this was impossible, that he should call security or the police or maybe a doctor. But another part of him, the part that had always been fascinated by science fiction movies and impossible puzzles, was incredibly curious. So you can actually teleport from place to place? In theory, yes. In practice, I keep ending up in the wrong places. Last week, I materialized in someone's swimming pool. The week before that, I appeared in the middle of a wedding ceremony. She looked embarrassed. Tonight, I was aiming for lab room 7 at my facility. Instead, I ended up here, crushing some poor guy who was just trying to work in peace. Jake stood up and brushed dirt off his clothes. His coffee had created a small brown lake on the wooden decking. This is definitely the weirdest thing that's ever happened to me, he admitted. And that's saying something because weird things happen to me a lot. Lily reached into her pocket and pulled out a crumpled business card. Look, I know this is all crazy and I'm sure you have a million questions. I wish I could stay and explain everything properly, but I need to get back to the lab before anyone notices I'm missing. She pressed the card into his hand. If you want answers, call this number tomorrow. I promise I'll explain everything I can. Jake looked at the card. It was simple white cardstock with basic black text, Lily Chen, Quantum Research Assistant, and a phone number. Will you be able to get back okay? He asked. I mean, if the teleportation thing isn't working properly, I'll take the stairs, Lily said with a small smile. Much more reliable than quantum physics, apparently. She started walking toward the rooftop access door, then stopped and turned back. Jake? Yeah? Thank you for not calling me crazy. Most people would have. How do you know my name? Lily looked confused for a moment, then her eyes widened. I don't know. I just knew it somehow. She shook her head. That's new. And probably not good. Before Jake could ask what that meant, she was gone, disappearing through the door and leaving him alone with his broken laptop, coffee-stained clothes, and a business card that might or might not be real. Jake sat back down on the bench, staring at the card in the dim light. Everything that had just happened defied logic and physics and common sense. But the ache in his shoulder was real. His laptop was definitely broken, and he was pretty sure he hadn't imagined the whole thing. He looked up at the stars, half expecting another person to come falling out of the sky. Just my luck, he said to the empty rooftop. But for the first time in years, he was smiling when he said it. Jake spent the entire next day convinced he'd dreamed the whole thing. Maybe he'd fallen asleep on that rooftop bench and his tired brain had created the most bizarre dream of his life. People didn't just fall out of thin air. Teleportation was science fiction, not science fact. But his laptop was still broken, sitting on his desk like evidence of something impossible. And every time he moved his left shoulder, it reminded him of the impact from the night before. Plus, there was that business card tucked into his wallet, the one that felt very real between his fingers. By Thursday afternoon, Jake had almost talked himself into believing it had all been some kind of elaborate prank. Maybe his coworkers had hired someone to mess with him. It wouldn't be the first time they'd pulled something like that. He was eating lunch in the company cafeteria, alone as usual, when it happened again. One second he was taking a bite of his sandwich, and the next second Lily came crashing down from nowhere, landing right on top of him. The impact knocked him backward off his chair, and his turkey sandwich exploded across the floor in a mess of bread, meat, and vegetables. Not again. Lily groaned, untangling herself from Jake's arms. Why does this keep happening? The cafeteria had gone completely silent. 20 pairs of eyes stared at them as Jake and Lily picked themselves up off the linoleum floor. Jake's face turned bright red as he realized his coworkers were witnessing the second weirdest moment of his life. Everyone, this is Lily, Jake said weakly, trying to brush lettuce off his shirt. She's visiting. From where? Asked Tom from accounting. The ceiling? Lily looked around at all the curious faces, then grabbed Jake's arm. We need to talk, privately, right now. She practically dragged him out of the cafeteria, leaving behind a room full of confused people and one very messy lunch. They didn't stop until they reached the parking garage where Lily finally let go of his arm. "Okay, what is going on?" Jake demanded. "And don't tell me you just happened to be in the neighborhood again." "I tried calling that number," Lily said, pacing back and forth between two parked cars. "It went straight to voicemail. I've been trying to reach my supervisor all morning, but he's not answering either. Something's wrong with the teleportation system and I don't know how to fix it." "Wait, you tried to teleport again? After what happened last night?" "I had to. It's part of my job. I'm supposed to test the system every day." Lily stopped pacing and looked at him with those intense green eyes. "But every time I try to go somewhere, I end up crashing into you instead. It's like you're some kind of magnet." Jake leaned against a concrete pillar trying to process this information. "So you're telling me that every time you use this teleportation thing, you're going to appear out of nowhere and land on me?" "It looks that way." "That's ridiculous. Tell me about it." They stood there in awkward silence for a moment, listening to cars driving by on the street outside. "I should probably warn you," Lily said finally. "I usually have to teleport at least 3 or 4 times a day for my research." Jake's eyes widened. 3 or 4 times? Sometimes more if we're running special tests. The next 2 weeks turned Jake's life completely upside down. True to her word, Lily kept appearing at the most inconvenient moments. She materialized on top of him while he was waiting for the bus, causing both of them to tumble into a nearby flower bed. She crashed down on him during his morning jog in the park, and they both ended up in the fountain soaking wet and covered in pondweed. The worst incident happened on a Saturday morning. Jake had finally decided to sleep in for once, planning to stay in bed until at least 10 o'clock. At exactly 8:30 a.m., Lily came falling through what seemed like empty air above his bed, landing on him with enough force to break the bed frame. "I'm so sorry," she said as they both crashed to the floor in a tangle of blankets and broken wood. "I was aiming for the lab's break room." Jake's downstairs neighbors started pounding on the ceiling, probably wondering why it sounded like furniture was falling from the sky. Which, Jake realized, wasn't that far from the truth. "This is getting ridiculous," Jake said, sitting up and rubbing his back. "There has to be a way to fix this. Don't you think I've been trying?" Lily snapped, then immediately looked sorry for raising her voice. "I've run every test I can think of. I've checked and rechecked all the coordinates. I've even tried having other people use the teleporter, and it works fine for them. It's only when I use it that things go wrong." Jake helped her stand up, carefully avoiding the broken bed frame. "When did this start happening?" "I mean, you said you've been doing this job for a while." "About 3 weeks ago, right around the time I first landed on you." "So it started the night we met?" Lily nodded slowly. "I hadn't thought about it that way, but yes. The very next day after our first encounter, the problems began. Jake started keeping a notebook, writing down every time Lily appeared. Monday at 9:15 a.m. while he was brushing his teeth. Tuesday at 2:30 p.m. while he was in a work meeting. Wednesday at 11:45 p.m. while he was watching TV. Thursday at 7:20 a.m. while he was making breakfast. He tried changing his routine, hoping to throw off whatever was causing the problem. He took different routes to work, ate lunch at different times, even spent one night in a hotel across town. Nothing worked. Lily still found him, appearing from thin air with perfect accuracy no matter where he was or what he was doing. His friends started noticing his strange behavior. He would flinch at unexpected sounds, constantly look up at the sky, and jump whenever someone approached him from behind. His coworker Dave asked if he was feeling okay, mentioning that Jake seemed nervous all the time. "Just going through a weird phase," Jake told him, which was probably the understatement of the century. The notebook revealed some interesting patterns. Lily never appeared when Jake was driving, probably because that would be dangerous. She never materialized when he was in the bathroom, which he was grateful for, and she seemed to avoid appearing when he was around large groups of people, except for that one incident in the cafeteria. "It's like you have some kind of built-in safety system," Jake told her one evening. They were sitting in his apartment, sharing a pizza while examining his notes. The broken bed had been replaced with a mattress on the floor, which seemed safer given the circumstances. "That's impossible," Lily said, but she sounded uncertain. "The teleportation system doesn't have any kind of artificial intelligence or safety protocols like that. It's just supposed to transport me from point A to point B. Then how do you explain this?" Jake showed her the notebook. "Look at the pattern. You never appear when it would be truly dangerous or embarrassing. Lily studied the pages, frowning. You're right. That's actually really weird. The system shouldn't be able to make those kinds of decisions. Maybe the problem isn't with your teleportation machine, Jake suggested. Maybe the problem is with us, and what do you mean? Jake hesitated, knowing how crazy his theory was going to sound. What if something happened that night on the rooftop? Something that connected us somehow. Connected how? I don't know. But think about it. You said my name that first night even though I'd never told you what it was. You knew it somehow. Lily set down her slice of pizza, looking thoughtful. And I keep landing on you specifically, even though statistically I should be appearing in empty spaces most of the time. Exactly. What are the odds that every single teleportation would put you in the exact same spot as one random person? They both sat quietly for a moment, considering the implications. So what do we do about it? Lily asked finally. Jake looked at his notebook filled with dates and times and descriptions of their increasingly frequent encounters. Part of him wanted to find a solution immediately. These constant surprise impacts were disrupting his entire life, and he was pretty sure he'd collected enough bruises to last him several years. But another part of him, a part he wasn't quite ready to admit existed, was starting to look forward to Lily's appearances. She was smart and funny, and their conversations after each collision had become the most interesting part of his day. I guess we figure out what's really going on, he said. Together. Lily smiled for the first time all evening. Together sounds good. The disaster happened during the most important presentation of Jake's career. His small tech company had finally gotten a meeting with some big investors, the kind of people who could turn their little startup into something major. Jake had been preparing for weeks, practicing his pitch until he could recite it in his sleep. Everything was going perfectly. The investors seemed interested, nodding along as Jake explained their new software that could help small businesses manage their finances more efficiently. His boss was smiling, which was rare. Even the notoriously difficult lead investor was asking good questions instead of checking his phone. Jake was just getting to the best part of his presentation, the part about projected profits when the impossible happened again. Lily came crashing through what appeared to be solid air above the conference table, scattering papers everywhere and sending Jake's carefully prepared charts flying. She landed directly on top of him, and they both crashed to the floor in a heap, taking several chairs down with them. The conference room fell completely silent except for the sound of papers fluttering to the ground like snow. Well, said the lead investor slowly, that's certainly not something you see every day. Jake's face turned approximately the same color as a fire truck as he helped Lily untangle herself from the mess of overturned furniture. His boss looked like he was about to have a heart attack, and the other investors were staring with their mouths open. I can explain, Jake said weakly, though he realized he actually couldn't. It's a demonstration, Lily announced suddenly, jumping to her feet with surprising confidence. Of our new, surprise delivery service. Surprise delivery service? Repeated one of the investors. Absolutely, Lily continued, warming to her improvised story. Imagine being able to instantly deliver important documents or small packages anywhere in the city. No traffic, no delays, just instant transportation. Jake stared at her in amazement. She was actually making this sound believable. Of course, we're still working out some of the technical details, Lily added, gesturing at the chaos around them. Like precision landing. The lead investor started laughing. You know what? I've seen a lot of startup pitches in my time, but nothing quite this memorable. You've definitely got our attention. Somehow, amazingly, the meeting ended well. The investors were intrigued by both Jake's financial software and Lily's fictional delivery service. They scheduled a follow-up meeting for the next week, giving Jake time to work on the landing accuracy of their demonstration. As soon as the investors left, Jake grabbed Lily's arm and pulled her out of the building. Okay, that's it, he said once they were safely outside. No more running away. No more mysterious phone calls that go to voicemail. I want the whole truth right now. Lily looked around the busy street, then nodded toward a small coffee shop across the road. Fine, but we need to go somewhere we can talk privately. 20 minutes later, they were sitting in a corner booth of an all-night diner, sharing a plate of French fries while Lily finally told Jake everything. My real name is Lily Chen, and I do work for the government, she began, but not in the way most people think of government work. We're part of a very small, very secret research department that studies things the public isn't ready to know about yet. Jake leaned forward, fascinated despite everything. What kind of things? Quantum physics applications. Specifically, something called quantum teleportation. Lily picked at a French fry nervously. About 2 years ago, our team figured out how to transport small objects instantly from one location to another. Last year, we started testing it with living subjects. Mice first, then larger animals. And now humans? Now humans. I've been the primary test subject for about 8 months. Lily looked embarrassed. I volunteered because the pay was really good, and honestly, teleporting is amazing when it works correctly. You step into a chamber in one location and instantly appear in another chamber somewhere else. No travel time, no traffic, no delays. Jake tried to wrap his mind around this. So you can actually teleport anywhere you want? That's where the problem started. The system is supposed to transport me between predetermined locations, specific chambers that are set up with the right equipment. But 3 weeks ago something went wrong. The night you first landed on me. Exactly. I was supposed to teleport from our main lab to a testing facility across town. Instead, I ended up on that rooftop crashing into you. Lily met his eyes. And ever since then, every time I try to teleport anywhere, I end up landing on you instead. Jake absorbed this information slowly. So when you disappeared that first night, you didn't actually walk down the stairs. No, I teleported away. But I had to walk back to get to my lab because the return trip worked normally that time. Lily sighed. I thought it was just a one-time malfunction. I filed a report with my supervisor and expected the tech team to fix it within a few days. But they couldn't fix it. They couldn't even figure out what was wrong. The equipment tests perfectly with everyone else. Other researchers can teleport back and forth without any problems. It's only when I try to use it that the system goes haywire. Jake thought about his notebook, full of documented appearances. So every time you've landed on me, you were actually trying to teleport somewhere else for work? Every single time. I've been trying to teleport to different research facilities, to meetings with other scientists, even just to the cafeteria in my building. But no matter where I program the coordinates, I always end up wherever you are instead. This explained so much. No wonder Lily had seemed so frustrated and embarrassed each time she appeared. She wasn't trying to disrupt Jake's life, she was just trying to do her job. What do your bosses think about all this? Lily looked uncomfortable. That's where things get complicated. I haven't exactly told them the full extent of the problem. What do you mean? They think the system is just having some minor calibration issues. I've been making excuses, saying I got sick or had family emergencies whenever I was supposed to teleport somewhere important. Lily buried her face in her hands. I've been basically lying to my supervisors for 3 weeks because I was too embarrassed to admit that I somehow broke their multi-million-dollar teleportation system. Jake felt a surge of sympathy for her. You've been dealing with this all by yourself? I didn't know what else to do. The research we're doing is incredibly sensitive. If I report that the system is completely malfunctioning and might be compromised, they could shut down the entire program. Dozens of people could lose their jobs, including me. But you can't keep this up forever. I know. I've been sleeping in my lab, living off vending machine food, trying to figure out what went wrong. I've run every diagnostic test I can think of, but I'm a test subject, not a technician. I don't really understand how the equipment works. Jake looked at this woman who had literally dropped into his life from nowhere. She was smart, dedicated, and clearly in over her head trying to solve an impossible problem by herself. What if I helped you? Lily looked up in surprise. What? I'm a programmer. I work with complex systems all the time. Maybe I can help you figure out what's wrong with your teleportation device. Jake, this is quantum physics we're talking about. It's not like debugging a computer program. Maybe not, but all modern equipment runs on software, right? There have to be computers controlling your teleportation system, and computers are something I actually understand. Lily was quiet for a long moment, considering this. It would mean sneaking you into a classified government facility. Sounds exciting. It could be dangerous. If we get caught, we could both end up in serious trouble. More dangerous than having you randomly fall on me several times a day for the rest of our lives? Despite everything, Lily laughed. Good point. Jake reached across the table and touched her hand. Look, I don't pretend to understand any of this quantum physics stuff. But I do understand that you're trying to solve this problem alone and it's not working. Maybe together we can figure something out. Why would you want to help me? This whole situation has been nothing but trouble for you. Jake thought about that question, 3 weeks ago, he would have said his life was boring and predictable. He went to work, came home, watched TV, and went to bed. The most exciting thing in his routine was trying a new flavor of coffee. Now his days were filled with the unexpected. He never knew when Lily might appear, turning his ordinary moments into adventures. Yes, it was chaotic and sometimes painful, but it was also the most interesting his life had ever been. Maybe because boring was getting old, he said finally. Lily smiled, the first genuinely happy expression he'd seen from her since that night on the rooftop. Okay, she said, let's solve this thing together. Getting into a secret government research facility turned out to be surprisingly easy when you had someone with a security badge and unlimited teleportation access. Well, unlimited access that unfortunately always ended with crashing into Jake, but still. Okay, here's the plan, Lily explained as they sat in Jake's car outside an ordinary-looking office building downtown. I'll teleport into the lab first, then come back and get you through the side entrance when the security guard does his rounds. Are you sure about this? Jake asked, looking at the building's cameras and security lights. This seems like the kind of place that has very serious consequences for unauthorized visitors. We'll be fine as long as we're careful. Besides, technically you're my consultant now. Do consultants usually sneak in after midnight? The best ones do. 20 minutes later, Jake found himself following Lily through empty hallways lined with laboratories that looked like something from a science fiction movie. Everything was white and chrome and filled with equipment he couldn't even begin to identify. This place is incredible, he whispered as they passed. A room full of computers that were quietly humming and blinking. Wait, until you see the teleportation chamber, Lily said, leading him deeper into the building. It's like nothing you've ever imagined. She wasn't wrong. The teleportation lab was enormous, with a ceiling that stretched up 3 stories high. In the center of the room stood a cylindrical chamber about the size of a phone booth, surrounded by massive computers and control panels covered in switches and monitors. This is it, Lily said, gesturing toward the chamber. This is where the magic happens, or where it's supposed to happen anyway. Jake walked around the equipment trying to understand what he was looking at. The computers were more advanced than anything he'd ever seen, but the basic principles seemed familiar. There were input terminals, processing units, and monitoring systems, just like any complex network. Can you show me how it works normally? Lily nodded and walked over to the main control panel. First, I input the coordinates for where I want to go. She typed in a series of numbers that appeared on several screens around the room. Then I step into the chamber, press this button, and the system should transport me to those exact coordinates. And instead, you end up wherever I am, every single time. Jake studied the monitors, watching streams of data scroll past in languages of mathematics and physics that were way over his head. But underneath all the complex science, he could see the basic structure of a computer program. What happens if someone else uses it? It works perfectly. Dr. Wilson used it yesterday to teleport to our facility in Chicago. No problems at all. So the issue isn't with the equipment itself. It's specifically with you using the equipment. They spent the next hour going through the system's diagnostic records. Lily was right. Every other user had perfect success rates. But every single one of her attempted teleportations since that first night had resulted in what the computer classified as destination error, coordinates overridden. Wait, Jake said, pointing at one of the screens. Look at this. The system isn't malfunctioning. It's actually working exactly as programmed. What do you mean? See these readings? The teleporter is receiving a signal that overrides your input coordinates. It's getting new destination data from somewhere else and following those instructions instead. Lily leaned over his shoulder to look at the screen. But where would that signal be coming from? That's what we need to figure out. They worked together through the night with Jake learning crash courses in quantum physics, while Lily tried to understand the software systems that controlled the teleporter. It was frustrating work, made more difficult by the fact that they had to be extremely quiet and couldn't turn on all the lights. Around 3 a.m, Lily had to test the system for her research log. I'm supposed to teleport to the backup facility across town, she explained. If I don't do my daily tests, my supervisor will start asking questions. Will you be okay landing on me from that distance? Only one way to find out. Lily stepped into the chamber and pressed the activation button. There was a flash of bright blue light and suddenly she was gone. 2 seconds later, Jake felt the familiar sensation of someone falling out of the sky directly onto him. "Ow," they both said at the same time, untangling themselves from a pile of cables and computer manuals. "At least the landing was softer this time," Lily said, rubbing her elbow. But Jake was staring at one of the computer screens with excitement. "Lily, look at this. When you teleported just now, I could see exactly what happened." The monitor was showing a detailed log of the teleportation process. Most of it was incomprehensible to Jake. But one section stood out clearly. "External signal detected. Overriding user coordinates. New destination locked." "There's definitely something sending a signal to the teleporter," Jake said. "Something that's telling it to send you to my location instead of where you want to go. But what could do that? And why would it be focused on me specifically?" Jake thought about this, remembering something from their first conversation. "You said that night on the rooftop you somehow knew my name even though I hadn't told you. Yeah, that was weird. I just knew it somehow. What if that wasn't just weird? What if that was a clue?" They spent the rest of the night researching everything they could find about quantum entanglement and electromagnetic fields. Most of it was way beyond Jake's understanding, but some of the basic concepts started to make sense. "Look at this," Lily said, pointing to an article on her laptop. "It says that when two particles become quantum entangled, they remain connected no matter how far apart they are. Changes to one particle instantly affect the other particle. Could that happen with people? Theoretically, maybe. If two people's bioelectric fields somehow became entangled at a quantum level," Lily trailed off, thinking, "like if they collided during a teleportation accident. Jake, I think you might be onto something. When I crashed into you that first night, the teleporter was still active. You were caught in the quantum field when we made physical contact. The more they researched, the more convinced they became that this was the answer, somehow. Their collision during Lily's first failed teleportation had created a connection between them that the quantum computers could detect. So the teleporter thinks I'm your intended destination," Jake said, "because we're quantum entangled, which would explain why the system overrides my coordinates. It's not malfunctioning. It's working exactly as designed. It's just that I'm entangled with you instead of the target location." As the weeks went by, their late-night research sessions became routine. Jake would finish his regular work, then meet Lily at the lab where they would continue trying to understand and solve their unusual problem. But something else was happening during those long hours spent working together. Jake found himself looking forward to Lily's unexpected appearances during the day, even though they still resulted in painful collisions. And Lily had started taking longer to leave after each teleportation accident, staying to talk about their research or just about their lives in general. "You know," Jake said one night as they shared takeout Chinese food in the lab, "I've been thinking about this whole situation. Good thoughts or bad thoughts? Both, I guess. On one hand, constantly getting knocked down by a teleporting person is not exactly what I planned for my life." Lily looked embarrassed. "I'm really sorry about all of this. I know it's been incredibly disruptive for you." "Let me finish," Jake said with a smile. "On the other hand, this has been the most interesting few months of my entire life. I've learned about quantum physics, snuck into a secret government facility, and met someone who can literally teleport. A year ago, the most exciting thing in my day was trying a new coffee flavor. So you're saying you don't mind being my personal landing pad? I'm saying that maybe some problems are worth having." They had developed their own system for dealing with the teleportations. Jake started carrying a small first aid kit for the inevitable bruises and scrapes. Lily began texting him before each scheduled teleportation so he could brace for impact. They even set up cushioned areas in Jake's apartment and office, turning his living space into a makeshift teleportation landing zone. "We're getting pretty good at this," Lily said one evening after a particularly smooth landing that only resulted in minor bruising. "I never thought I'd become an expert at catching falling people, but here we are." Their friends and coworkers had noticed the change in both of them. Jake seemed happier and more confident, while Lily was less stressed and more open. Jake's boss even commented that his work had improved significantly, probably because he was now motivated to finish his projects quickly so he could spend time on their research. "I think we might actually solve this," Lily said one night as they reviewed their latest findings. "I mean, we understand what's happening now. We just need to figure out how to break the quantum entanglement." Jake looked at her, realizing that part of him wasn't entirely sure he wanted to solve it anymore. Their weird situation had brought them together in a way that never would have happened under normal circumstances. Without the teleportation accidents, they probably never would have met at all. "Yeah," he said finally. "I think we will. But for the first time since this whole—" The solution came in the most ridiculous way possible, which somehow seemed fitting for their entire impossible situation. It was a Thursday night, and Jake was at the lab helping Lily run another series of tests on the teleportation system. They'd been working for weeks to understand exactly how their quantum entanglement worked, hoping to find a way to safely break the connection without damaging the equipment or hurting either of them. Jake's co-worker Tony had stopped by earlier to drop off some computer cables that Jake had borrowed. Tony was notorious for being clumsy, especially around expensive equipment, so Jake had been nervous about letting him anywhere near the quantum computers. "Just set the cables on that table and don't touch anything else," Jake had warned him. "Relax. I'm not going to break your science fiction gadgets," Tony had replied, setting down the cables exactly where Jake had pointed. Everything seemed fine until around midnight, when Tony realized he'd left his car keys somewhere in the lab. He came back looking for them, stumbling around in the dark trying not to wake up the security guards. That's when disaster struck. Tony bumped into a rolling cart loaded with coffee supplies that someone had left next to the main computer banks. The cart tipped over, sending a full pot of fresh coffee cascading directly onto the quantum processing units. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Sparks flew, alarms started beeping, and half the lights in the lab went out. Emergency protocols kicked in, automatically shutting down all the teleportation equipment to prevent any dangerous quantum field fluctuations. "Oh no, oh no, oh no," Tony shouted, trying uselessly to mop up coffee with his shirt. "Jake's going to kill me. This stuff probably costs more than my house." "What happened?" Lily asked, running over from the teleportation chamber where she'd been preparing for another test. "I think Tony just broke quantum physics," Jake said, staring at the coffee-soaked computers in amazement. It took nearly an hour to clean up the mess and assess the damage. Surprisingly, most of the equipment was fine. The coffee had only affected the main processing unit, which had multiple backup systems to protect it from exactly this kind of accident. "We'll need to run a full system reboot and recalibration," Lily explained as they worked to dry off the computers. "It's going to take at least 6 hours to get everything back online." "I'm really, really sorry," Tony said for the 20th time. "I'll pay for any damage, I promise." "Don't worry about it," Jake told him. "Accidents happen." But as the quantum computers slowly came back online, something unexpected occurred. The system began running through its automatic calibration sequence, essentially resetting all of its quantum field parameters back to factory defaults. "Lily," Jake said, watching the calibration readings scroll across the monitors, "I think Tony might have accidentally solved our problem." "What do you mean?" "Look at this." Jake pointed to the quantum field measurements. "The system is completely resetting all of its quantum signatures. If our entanglement was stored in the computer's memory, then rebooting everything might have erased it." Lily studied the readings, her eyes growing wide with excitement. "You might be right. All the quantum field mappings are being cleared and rebuilt from scratch. There's only one way to find out for sure." Lily nodded, understanding what he meant. She would have to test the teleporter and see if it would finally take her where she was supposed to go, instead of dropping her on top of Jake. "Are you ready for this?" she asked, standing at the entrance to the teleportation chamber. Jake positioned himself across the room as far from the teleporter as possible. "Go ahead. Try to teleport to the backup facility." Lily stepped into the chamber and input the coordinates for their sister lab across town. She paused for a moment, looking at Jake through the transparent walls of the teleporter. "If this works," she said, "I might actually make it to the right destination for the first time in months. And if it doesn't work, I'll catch you like always." She smiled and pressed the activation button. The chamber filled with bright blue light. Energy crackled around the walls, and suddenly Lily was gone. Jake waited, tensing himself for the familiar impact of someone falling from the sky. 5 seconds passed, then 10 seconds, then 30 seconds. Lily didn't appear. Jake's phone buzzed with a text message. "It worked. I'm actually at the backup facility. The coffee spill fixed everything." For the first time in months, Lily had successfully teleported to her intended destination. The quantum entanglement that had connected them was broken. The teleporter was working normally again. Their problem was finally solved. Jake should have felt relieved and happy. Instead, he felt strangely empty. Over the next few days, life slowly returned to what most people would consider normal. Jake went back to his regular routine of work, home, and sleep without any surprise interruptions. No one fell on him from impossible heights. No one crashed through his ceiling or materialized in his living room. It was peaceful and predictable and absolutely boring. Lily was able to return to her normal research schedule, teleporting successfully between facilities and conducting her experiments without any unusual complications. Her supervisor praised her for finally getting the system's minor calibration issues resolved. But something felt wrong for both of them. Jake found himself constantly looking up at the sky, half expecting Lily to come falling down at any moment. He missed their late-night research sessions and their conversations after each accidental collision. His apartment felt too quiet, and his daily routine seemed incredibly dull compared to the chaos and excitement of the past few months. Lily discovered that teleporting was much less interesting when it worked perfectly every time. She missed the unpredictability, the adventure, and the unique connection she'd shared with Jake. Her successful experiments felt hollow somehow, lacking the personal stakes that had made their problem-solving so engaging. After a week of this strange normalcy, Jake couldn't stand it anymore. He drove to Lily's lab one evening and waited outside until her shift ended. "Jake," she said, seeming genuinely happy to see him. "What are you doing here? I wanted to see how you were doing. Make sure the teleporter was still working correctly." "It's working perfectly. I've had 12 successful teleportations this week, all to the correct destinations." "That's great." They stood there awkwardly for a moment, both of them clearly wanting to say something but not knowing how to start. "I miss it," Lily said finally. "Miss what?" "The chaos, the unpredictability, landing on you at random times during the day." She looked embarrassed. "I know that sounds crazy, but our whole situation was kind of amazing, wasn't it?" Jake felt a huge sense of relief. "I was hoping you'd say that because I miss it too. My life has been incredibly boring without you randomly falling out of the sky." "So what do we do about it?" Jake thought about this. "Well, just because we're not quantum entangled anymore doesn't mean we can't still see each other." "You mean like normal people do? Actually planning when and where to meet?" "I know it's a radical concept, but it might work." Lily laughed, the first genuine laugh Jake had heard from her since the coffee incident. "I'd like that. Though I have to warn you, normal social interactions might seem pretty tame after everything we've been through. Maybe we don't have to be completely normal." 6 months later, Jake had moved into a larger apartment, one with reinforced flooring and extra cushions in every room. Lily had been promoted to senior researcher and was leading her own teleportation experiments. And while she no longer accidentally crashed into Jake during her work, she had developed a habit of deliberately miscalibrating her coordinates every now and then, just for old time's sake. "You know, you could just use the front door like a normal person," Jake said one evening after Lily had intentionally teleported directly onto his couch, nearly giving him a heart attack. "Where's the fun in that?" she replied, settling in next to him and stealing some of his popcorn. They had turned their weird beginning into something wonderful. Jake had started his own consulting business, specializing in debugging impossible technical problems. Lily had received recognition for her pioneering work in quantum field interactions, though she carefully omitted certain details about her research methods. Their friends still had no idea how they'd actually met. When people asked, they would just smile and say it was a collision of fate, which was technically true. On the anniversary of their first meeting, Lily surprised Jake by taking him back to the rooftop garden where it all began. She'd set up a picnic dinner and even brought cushions to recreate their original crash landing. "1 year ago, I fell out of the sky and completely disrupted your quiet, boring life," she said as they sat watching the sunset over the city. "Best thing that ever happened to me," Jake replied, "even though I broke your laptop and spilled coffee all over you, especially because of that." As the stars came out, Lily pulled a small device from her pocket, a portable teleportation beacon that she'd borrowed from the lab. "Want to see something cool?" she asked. "With you, always." She activated the beacon and suddenly they were both surrounded by the familiar blue light of the teleportation field. But instead of transporting them somewhere else, The device created a small quantum field right there on the rooftop, making the air around them shimmer and sparkle like they were sitting inside a cloud of stars. I figured,